Whether you like the OG Anunoby trade or not, he made it very clear in his debut for the Knicks that he is going to have a big impact. You can talk about value, his free agency, a new contract, all of that, but on the floor, this was a really exciting start to his career with the Knicks. And OG wasted no time in the first quarter showing the full range of what he can do to help the Knicks win. And honestly, he did everything. He showed the total package in the first quarter of his first game as a Knick. Now, Minnesota's a really interesting matchup for OG to start his Knicks career because it allows him to show a tremendous amount of versatility, especially defensively. Because he can go from one possession, as he does here, staying with Anthony Edwards in a ball screen, forcing a deflection. And then just a few possessions later, we see something we see all the time when we watch the Knicks. We've got Jalen Brunson. He's just trying to create. And here's OG Anunoby, spacing in the corner. They get him a nice look and he knocks it down. Being able to be a two-way player like that has such a big impact. But it's not just on the ball either. Here's OG in the corner. And to be a complete NBA defender, you need to be active and engaged in all parts of the floor. And without OG's help here, this is a bucket for Rudy Gobert, but he recognizes that they're in trouble. He gives good help, is right there and gives a deflection. And then just to complete the OG Anunoby first quarter showcase, he's over here in the corner. And you see something that can differentiate you a little bit. As a 3-and-D wing, he's able to attack this closeout, get baseline, and find a nice little pass to Josh Hart to end the quarter. All of that just in the first quarter for OG Anunoby. So he spends the entire first quarter showing the entire package, the entire part of his game, and then we get into the second quarter and it's time to showcase the defensive versatility. We talked about how he guarded Ant well in the first half. Well, now he's going to guard Karl-Anthony Towns halfway through the second quarter. The list of players in the NBA that can go one quarter guarding Anthony Edwards well, in the next quarter guard Karl-Anthony Towns well, the list of players that have the skill set, the size, the physical profile to be able to do that, it's not a very long list. And you can see what it allows the Knicks to do in terms of their defensive lineups as well here. Playing a little bit smaller, but it's okay because they have OG here to guard Karl-Anthony Towns even against Minnesota's big lineup, and he creates a deflection that now gets them out on the run. Literally like 20 seconds of game time later, we have Karl-Anthony Towns isolating against OG Anunoby here at the top of the key. And again, he's able to stay with them, has the size and strength to deal with one of the tougher 4 matchups in the league, and Cat tries to flop and get a foul call that he doesn't get. Then we get out in transition, we're creating, and it looks a little bit more funky there for OG. We're going to work on that, but it leads to a wide open 3. And then like a minute of game time later, here we go all over again. Deja vu for Karl-Anthony Towns, tries to create a foul, doesn't get it. That is all OG Anunoby. It might look simple, it might look like Cat's not making a very good move here, but I'm telling you, guys that can guard those two players in back-to-back quarters are extremely rare. Remember what I talked about earlier with the defensive lineups, kind of what OG unlocks for this team? Well, now we've got Julius Randle back in the game, so he can go and guard Cat. And now we've got OG back on Ant Edwards. And again, just like in that first half, he's able to stick with him off the ball screen. And again, showing that defensive versatility positionally. Look at him track Ant Edwards all the way around the floor. He gave him no space. And then to finish out the quarter, just for good measure, shows his cutting ability along the baseline, gets himself a baseline dunk. Which kind of gets us into the theme of the third quarter as well. And that is OG Anunoby just provides them a body type and an athleticism boost that they just didn't have on the team before. They had a lot of guards, they had a lot of guys that were quick, but weren't strong and athletic the way that OG is. And we see that here off a missed shot. We're getting out in transition, we're finishing this. And then just like earlier at the end of the first half, he's cutting along the baseline, he's in that dunker spot. He's just really creating a lot of issues for the Timberwolves at the rim. And then he does all that work defensively, he's along the baseline of the dunker spot, and then he can still just pop right out here and hit a corner 3. You honestly couldn't ask for a better first 3 quarters for him. Now, unfortunately for OG, he ends up fouling out in the fourth quarter. He did hit a 3, made a couple of nice defensive plays, but really, that's about as good of a debut as you can expect for him in his first game as a Knick. Now, we're going to get to some of the contract stuff, but in terms of on the court, there's a ton of positives here for OG Anunoby because he looks like exactly what you traded for. He looks exactly like the guy that he was in Toronto when he was at his best, defending, hitting threes, working along the baseline, providing athleticism. And I think it made sense for Toronto to move on from a team building perspective, but also on the floor, they just had a lot of guys that occupied a similar space on the floor and not necessarily a similar role as OG, but just kind of were in the same spots and were just better than him in both Scottie Barnes and Pascal Siakam. And having a more clearly defined role here in New York as clearly the best perimeter defender that they have, the most versatile perimeter defender that they have, and it's just clear what he's here to do. At least it's clear to the team. Hopefully it's clear to OG as well. And I think that's going to be really nice for him because he's been at times an inconsistent player, an up and down player, and certainly the shooting percentage is going to be something to keep an eye on. You need him to be able to space the floor well to truly be at the top tier of his effectiveness. But just on first glance here, this feels like a very clean fit here for OG Anunoby. And I also want to see, especially offensively, what kind of units they're willing to put out there. Obviously, Minnesota is just a gigantic team. That's their thing. They are the biggest front court team in the league, arguably. But against other teams that aren't as big, are we going to see OG at the 4 and Julius Randle at the 5? What are those offensive numbers going to look like in terms of offensive rating? Are those going to be able to hold up defensively if it's like Brunson, 2 guards, OG, and Julius Randle? There's just a lot of interesting stuff there that didn't exist pre-OG Anunoby trade. RJ Barrett had some interesting upside still as a perimeter creator. Emmanuel quickly was really good for them off the bench and someone that they're definitely going to need to replace in terms of their bench scoring. But those guys being swapped out, at least on the floor, you can talk about value in terms of the trade, but at least on the floor, makes a lot of sense now when you see it. They didn't need more guards. They didn't need more guys alongside Jalen Brunson unless they're like top tier stars. They have plenty of Dante DiVincenzo's, Quentin Grimes, Josh Hart's. They needed someone bigger, and they know that they can probably find another creator alongside Brunson that works pretty well in the future. And I think this debut is very indicative of that. Now, one of the interesting things to keep in mind for OG moving forward is that there are rumors that one of the reasons that maybe he wasn't super happy in Toronto and would have left in free agency is that he wants more of an offensive role. He wants a ton of money for one thing, but he also wants more of an offensive role, wants to be more involved offensively. And I'm curious if that's going to happen in New York for 2 different reasons. One, this is a very Jalen Brunson-centric team, and then of course you have Julius Randle as well, and everybody else offensively is mostly just there to dunk the ball and shoot threes, and that's just how they have built their team. And so I'm curious how, one, that's going to develop in New York in terms of OG getting involved in the offense in general, them prioritizing him at all offensively. He wants to show off some of those individual one-on-one moves that he doesn't really get a chance to do all the time. And 2, if he's going to be good enough for that to actually make sense for this team. It's clear that as a connective piece, defensively, shooting threes, getting on the offensive glass, being in the dunker spot, it's clear that there's a lot of positives there. But I wonder if we're going to see a little bit more from OG Anunoby from an offensive perspective as things really start to get rolling in New York. And then, of course, the other part of this, and I think probably the main part of the trade, honestly, at first, is what's the next move for New York? They've got all these future first-round picks. They've got a ton of stuff that they can, kind of use to add another star, and it's clear that OG Anunoby is a guy that fits well alongside of other stars, and that could be a big reason to make this kind of move. And so if the Knicks are able to bring in someone that works well on their team in that Dante DiVincenzo, Josh Hart kind of spot as another perimeter creator alongside Brunson, then you have Randle in the front court, all the stuff that OG can do defensively. Mitchell Robinson, who's hurt for the rest of the year, but if they retain OG, him together with those 2 guys, they could have 2 all-defense players in their lineup next year, assuming that OG returns and signs a new contract in free agency. And if you add another scorer alongside Brunson, another creator, things get really interesting in New York really quickly. This one debut does not mean that the trade is necessarily a success, but if you're a Knicks fan, this is about everything you could have asked for in OG's first game. But of course, the final question with any trade like this is, does it get you up into a different tier as a contender? Does this put the Knicks in like semi-contender category? Obviously, it's too early to tell right now. Certainly, it's a cleaner fit. You can fully understand what their best starting and ending lineups are going to be. There is certainly more versatility there. And when they match up with, the Bostons of the world that have these bigger, really skilled wings, they have that matchup now. I think it's definitely possible that by the time we get to the postseason, we see the Knicks as a semi-contender to, make a run to the conference finals or something. And that's still pending some other moves potentially they could make at the deadline as well.